Hello, welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm Andy McGrath, your host. Now, today we have Seth Breedlove. Seth is an Ohio filmmaker. He's written, edited, produced, directed shorts, and features about a variety of topics, but he's best known for his production company, the films they produced under the Small Town Monsters banner. First chapter in this series of documentaries was the film Minerva Monster in 2015, which he wrote and directed. He's since worked on more projects which fall under the Small Town Monsters umbrella, including Beast of Whitehall, Boggy Creek Monster, rapidly followed by the Mothman of Point Pleasant, and Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. In 2018, Seth wrote and directed the Flatwoods Monster, A Legacy of Fear, and produced On the Trail of Champ, a 5-episode miniseries. It's also released recently the Bray Road Beast, featuring Linda Godfrey and Lyle Blackburn, and its current cinematic trio On the Trail of Bigfoot, Terror in the Skies, and Momo, the Missouri Monster, are presently in production and coming soon. Seth, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I'm very, very glad to have you. Now, you sound like an incredibly busy man, and that is shown in your huge bio there. So, for everyone in this genre of cryptozoology and the paranormal, I think there's a jumping off point. It seems a time when their interest turns into an obsession. I'm just wondering, when did this crypto crazy and paranormal world first pull you in? How's your journey been from the beginning until now?
Yeah, it's always a weird. I took a weird trajectory because I didn't get into this stuff until I was much older than most people I talk to are like, oh yeah, I was always into the the paranormal or whatever from a really young age, and I didn't get into it till I was in my mid to late 20s. So and it hasn't been that long. You're like maybe 10 years or whatever, but I was always kind of vaguely aware of local monster legends and stuff just as a kid from other kids in the neighborhood making references to like the Minerva Monster and stuff like that. So so there was always an awareness, but it wasn't actually until the Mothman prophecies came out and my sister bought John Keel's book because for some reason my sister was like obsessed with Richard Gere and she saw the movie and really liked it, so she naturally went and bought John Keel's book, and we had this conversation where she had explained to me that there were people that believed that UFOs were real and aliens were real, and that had never crossed my mind. So that was kind of like my introduction to the fact that this is even a thing that people, claim really happens to them. And so I was always kind of into it after that. And then in the early 2000s, I gained a mild interest in the subject of Bigfoot, and shortly after that, probably around like 2006, someone told me about sort of a series of Bigfoot sightings that were going on outside of Bolivar, which is the town I grew up in. And before that, I had no idea that was a thing really on the East Coast, that people in Ohio claim to have those sightings, at least not in the, of a creature called Bigfoot. I was always kind of aware of Minerva Monster, but not Bigfoot being what Minerva Monster was. And anyway, so I became aware of these sightings, and I went down and actually started sort of driving around the back roads and talking to locals about what was being seen, if they'd seen anything and stuff like that. And I started to collect all these stories about weird animal mutilations and things that were taking place outside of that town. And like that, and that was pretty much it. I've always had a lot of different interests, and I tend to be the type of guy that if I gain an interest in something, I inevitably start to insert myself into it. Like I loved comic books for years, so I started a comic book podcast, and then I started writing comics and stuff like that. So I've always been that kind of person, and the it just I started to gravitate toward creating my own paranormal content after like 4 years of listening to podcasts and stuff like that. I started out by doing a podcast about Bigfoot, and then I moved into into creating the films in around that would have been 2014 that we shot Minerva Monster. So it's a weird trajectory to take to get to where I am now.
It is, but I don't think really that it does have to have a definite jumping off point in the formative youth years for everybody. I myself was a singer for many years, although I I always followed cryptozoology. I was always interested. I was just a serious touring, recording singer. That's what I did, And as like most singers, I wasn't famous or successful, so I just carried on with this as a sort of my wife calls it my 40 fever. I turned 40 and said, okay, I'm going to write a book about it. 40 fever. In fact, it was her. She said, why don't you do something with this monster thing that you seem to be talking about all the time? And my wife is a very straight talking Middle Eastern girl. So I always say to her, Neely, that's her name, Neely, they're real, these things are really real. She says, Andy, I know that they're real, but I don't care. So yeah, she decided it would be good for me to have that separate interest. And I've just kind of flown with it since. Now, looking at your career in this so far, you clearly seem to be a bit of a workaholic by the looks of it. You got a strong work ethic, and I would say that that's paying off. It does seem to me that a good network would be dying to give a company like yours a home. So why did you decide to be independent, or is that something that you have decided yourself, or was it imposed upon you by choice?
I mean, we've went as far back as Minerva, before Minerva Monster had even come out in 2015. We were talking to production companies in Hollywood, and honestly, I don't think it'd be difficult for anyone to go out and find a production company looking to put their show on TV, as crazy as that might sound in the paranormal world. If you're doing anything where the quality is halfway decent, I think it's actually fairly simple to go out and find that, like to find Hollywood or have Hollywood find you. So we've talked to 4 different production companies over the year. We've gotten as far as, development meetings and things like that. And it just never has come to fruition. We very early on we pitched the show, or didn't pitch the show. We were approached by a development company, and they wanted to pitch us on this idea of having Small Town Monsters being myself and the 2 guys that were producing the series at that time, and Megan Fox, and she's got her own show now. But it was going to be the 4 of us driving around in a literal Scooby-Doo van, like, trying to solve monster mysteries, and I didn't want anything to do with that. But I hated the jobs I had leading up to filmmaking. Yeah. I've never been terribly satisfied with the work I've done. So the last thing I want to do is go do another job that I hate. And frankly, I never have wanted to be on TV. I've never wanted to be in front of the camera. So the idea of sticking myself in front of the camera is pretty appalling to me. And I've always steered clear of that. I mean, I've turned down probably 7 or 8 offers to do like the talking head on like, shows about monsters, because they always are approaching me as some sort of expert in the field or something. So I've never had a desire for like fame. So that kind of stuff just didn't interest me. But that frankly, like if we sign with a production company, there will be notes, there will be their input on what we're doing. We're currently working with Adam Wingard on an original series sort of spin on Small Town Monsters. It would be slightly different from what we're doing now. And even that, like we're in no rush. It's kind of taking its time to get going, and I'm totally fine with that. If it happens, great, and if not, that's great too, because we've managed to find the backing of the small community that surrounds us. The only downside to what we do, as far as like being completely independent, is the fact that the being able to hire in like some of the people that are on the crew freelance, you can't do it because we don't have the budget for something like that. So that's the biggest downside to what we do. And obviously we'd probably be much better off financially if we did something like that. But I also, and we've talked about, like myself and a lot of the crew have talked about that, I think we'd all be miserable if we were doing something, where you're being controlled by some network. It's also like a not a perfect storm. What's the opposite of like a perfect storm? I don't know. It's a very fortuitous thing that so much of the crew are guys I grew up with, and that we enjoy spending time together. Because I mean, if it wasn't for that, I don't think we could have gotten off the ground the way we did, where for the first few movies, none of us made any money. I mean, our first 2 years of running SDM, we took a huge loss, like both years. So And that's entirely because we were so independent and still are. So, but we wouldn't have gotten to where we are if so many people hadn't been willing to work essentially for free when we were kind of getting off the ground.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And essentially, what you're talking about here is freedom. That's the reason they did, and perhaps the quality or the content of your productions you're asserting would not have been the same with notes and producers and network direction. I think that makes perfect sense. Now, you've directed a lot of these films in a short space of time. You've talked a little bit about the film project so far, and the creatures you've decided to focus upon. How do you decide which monster you're going to direct next? What is it about these films you've got so far? What captures you about these particular cryptid encounters? It says that's the one for me. The Bray Road Beast, the Minerva Monster. That has to be made. What's attractive? What draws you in?
It's always like the human side of it. I really don't. I love the monster legends and all that stuff, but you can go out and find numerous YouTube videos about monsters and stuff like that now. So what's always drawn me to the stories we cover are the people that are like at the heart of those stories, and then how their lives were affected by it. The actual monster, like what type of monster and stuff like that, just doesn't interest me. Like we had to tell the Mothman following Boggy Creek Monster because I've always loved that story, and I wanted to have a part in telling that story in a way that I hadn't seen done before. And the same thing holds true for Flatwoods. We went into Flatwoods Monster knowing we wouldn't make any money on it, and we didn't. Like we made a short 45-minute film about the Flatwoods Monster, in a market that really would rather have longer content. Like so we knew going into it we weren't going to make much money. But I've always wanted to tell that story, and to be able to get Ed and Fred in front of the camera like we did, like I was just excited to have a role in that. So it all comes down to the people, and like how their lives were affected by it, and whether or not we can get those people in the film. I mean, the it's funny I say that though, because I think the one case where I've been desperate to tell Momo since the beginning. Like I've always wanted to tell the Momo story just because I really like it. It harkens back to a lot of the things I love about Minerva Monster. But without, I mean, it's an unfortunate thing, but there aren't many people that are willing to talk about the Missouri Monster in Louisiana, Missouri. So that's why the film we're telling is going to be like very short on documentary content. It's going to be much more of a narrative film. And that's a case where I just really want to have a hand in telling that story, regardless of how many people we can get, in front of the camera to tell their own sort of story. But it's also a cool way for us to open the door to narrative storytelling, which is something we want to do going forward. In addition to all the documentaries, we want to be able to tell, traditional sort of narrative film. That's where Zach, my cinematographer, and I kind of became friends. Actually, I was just talking to someone about this someone asked me how I met Zach. We were standing outside of a Borders Books that he worked at, and I was like 17 years old, and he was smoking a cigarette, and I walked up holding a New York Film Academy flyer, and he asked me if I was going to film school, and I said I'd like to, when I graduate college. And we talked about film, and like we exchanged AIM screen names and went home, and we were aiming each other later and just talking about film and stuff like that. And we set up a time to hang out. And all I know is like Zach and I, who again, Zach Palmisano, director of photography on all Small Town Monsters movies now. At the end of our first night hanging out, we're flying down this back alley street in downtown Canton. Zach was clinging to the roof of the van. He was like literally laying on the top of the van with a camcorder, and we were chasing my brother with the van. And that was like how our first time hanging out ended. So it was pretty much from the beginning, like this was always our friendships, the friendships that are involved in making these movies was always going to be centered around film. It's just, I don't think we ever expected to actually have an audience for what we were making.
No, sure. And hopefully still a little brother at the end of it too. An action scene. That's a great first day out as friends.
Mm-hmm.
I also see from your bio that you are a journalist, that you wrote for several magazines and websites and things like that. Now, that interested me because when it comes to sifting out the good from the bad, or real witness and hoax witness reports, it's sometimes very difficult. You have to have a local understanding, cultural understanding of the people you're dealing with. How do you validate bona fide witness reports? And once you validate them, and coming back onto the Mothman Monster here, how do you get people to come forward and agree to appear on camera?
Well, the way we get them to, what was the first part of that before the
how do your journalistic skills enable you to decide whether a report is real or hoax?
Yeah, well, I always say that it's impossible to actually tell if someone's lying or telling the truth. I don't care how good someone is at reading someone else. I consider myself actually very good at reading people, and talking to people and things like that. And having said that, I can't tell when people are telling the truth or lying. I think short of like lie detector tests, which are faulty and things like that, you might never know if someone's telling the truth. Like if we could all walk around and just read people by their facial expressions, there would be marriages in turmoil and killers would be arrested every day in their homes, and that's not the way things happen.
Would definitely be over, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like for me, I am good at reading people. I do think I have at least some sense if they're telling the truth or not, but I'm never 100% sure, obviously. But and as far as like the reporter side of me, that really only comes into play, I think, when I'm editing, as far as like telling a story and putting the story on screen. That, because I worked in newspapers for a few years, a number of years really, I at least have an understanding of telling a large scale story in a very short period of time, like in as condensed a format as possible, and just whittling things down to the meat. So that comes into play there. But as far as like convincing witnesses and things like that, I just try to talk to people, and that doesn't have anything to do with, as far as I know, that doesn't necessarily come from being a reporter or anything. I probably learned that from my dad more than anyone. It's just talking to people like they're people. And like Fred May had never spoken about the Flatwoods. Well, he had, but he was done speaking about the Flatwoods Monster incident, and I knew that when I first met him. But I sat on his porch for 2.5 hours and just talked about his life and different things, nothing about the Flatwoods Monster. And at the end of that, I came away from it with like a vague sort of half willingness from him to be on camera, but nothing was set in stone. So we continued calling each other for months after that, for 3 or 4 months, before I finally got him locked down to do an interview. And then we ended up getting Ed May as well. So, and the same thing happened with like the Caton family. I talked to him for months leading up to the making of the movie. So sometimes it's just communicating with people and hopefully they get to know you as a person and can read you in some way that and know that you're not out just to make a laughing stock of them or make billions of dollars off their life story.
I think that's a very valid point, and most people, especially here in the UK, I've contacted, the one thing they're most worried about is their story being sensationalized or diminished in some way that makes them appear to be foolish, I suppose. And I wondered if that was the actually the vibe in Missouri. That sounds like quite a conservative place to me, Missouri, and perhaps people don't want to speak because it will impact on their local life with friends and family and jobs and the rest of it too. Even as a researcher here in the UK, in the area we live in Surrey, most of the parents we know through the schools, they're all lawyers and accountants and very, very professional people only. It's that kind of area. And somebody asked me, do you talk to the other parents about Bigfoot, or do your kids go into school and speak about this? I said, no, I said, why not? I said, because I want their kids to play with my kids. You know, I don't want them to have any reason to stay away from the Bigfoot kids, because it's a conservative place. In that sense, at least, you would be at least perceived to be some kind of strange, overgrown boy that hasn't quite learned to face up to life yet. And I think those are issues that people in this community deal with, even when they've dedicated their lives to it. Now, I did watch the Bray Road Beast several times. I watched it again this morning, actually, and I really, really like the dark, sullen Lyle's commentary as well. I think it's really, really nice. Got a good voice for that. When I was thinking about it recently, I posted Werewolf of Camberwell picture from my Beast of Britain map, posted it on my website and on some pages, and the response was overwhelming, more than anything I posted before. And there's something about the Dogman or werewolf at the moment that seems to be really appealing to fans of the genre. What do you think that is, and do you think it has a chance of superseding Bigfoot one day to become, America's most popular cryptid?
No, I think if any cryptid is going to overtake Bigfoot, it'll be Mothman. It might have already happened, honestly.
Oh, really?
I had a whole discussion with, or I guess you could call it an argument with Lauren Coleman when we were filming Terror in the Skies, because he's still very much, like Bigfoot's the most popular cryptid, and I was, in my opinion, it's the Mothman. Like if you look at pop culture and what is sort of in the lexicon today, it's Mothman more so than Bigfoot, and the age of people that are into the Mothman story, it seems to be a little broader than Bigfoot, and just the demographic, like the type of people that are interested in Mothman is more broad than people that are into Bigfoot. But yeah, the Dogman, I don't know what it is about that particular phenomena or cryptid, or even if you want to get, bring in the werewolf as a part of the lore, like that is just something that seems to appeal to a lot of people. And I don't personally believe that there's some sort of undiscovered upright walking canid creature running around.
It's definitely a hard concept to digest.
Yeah, and so I have always been drawn to that sort of like werewolf lore, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to make the movie, really. But so I don't know what it is about that particular beast that keeps it, in sort of the public eye. And obviously there's people are seeing something that seems to resemble, an upright dog-like creature. Although, like one thing that I think it gets overlooked a lot in the Bray Road story is the fact that so many of the reports are of four-legged, quadrupeds, not bipedal canid like creatures. Like you, if you broke it down, I'd have to ask Linda her take on this, but I may have actually done that during the making of the movie, but like to me from the reports I've read, it's like something like 70% of those reports are of a quadruped, not a bipedal creature.
Something more like a wahila.
Yeah, something more like it could be a coy wolf too. You just like it's very difficult to sort of judge the size of something, on all fours that looks like a wolf. Like it's a difficult creature to look at and then be like, okay, that thing's 6 feet long. Like you have no idea, especially if you're seeing it at a distance, without something for scale. So I think a lot of those reports might be misidentification of some sort of known, animal in the U.S. I'm all over the map with this answer too, but
no, I think it's fine actually. I think essentially, and it's that there are similar reports here in the UK and in other places that have investigated either of these dogmen or werewolves at first being on two legs and then dropping down onto four legs and running. So if you wanted to rationalize it, I guess you could say somehow some very large wolf-like creature has managed to get itself up onto its hind legs and then drop down to run away. But the descriptions seem to be a bit more intricate than that, but we have just as many. We had it recently here in 2016 with the old stinker, the Beast of Barmston Drain. I reported on that, and I was convinced that most of the reports, second-hand, third-hand reports, were of bipedal creatures. But actually, speaking to Mike Covell, who was one of the main paranormal investigators who went looking for this creature and interviewed the witnesses, most witnesses saw something on 4 legs that was very, very large. Yeah. And only 1 or 2 reported something on 2 legs.
And see, so, I can buy into that. Like, I can totally buy into some sort of massive, like, unknown wolf species or canid species around the world. It's when you get into the bipedal thing that it becomes a little murky to me, because like you almost, to me, you almost have to start looking at the supernatural at that point if you're gonna go with the fact that there's some sort of wolf that can, half man half wolf, that can walk on its hind legs. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, like, biologically.
So far, I mean, at least we could kind of equate Bigfoot to Gigantopithecus, or some would say, a Paranthropus or Denisovan or whatever else in the hominid scale. Sure. Those are ideas. You've got something to base those ideas on. The wolf thing, it's difficult for me, but of course, in the folklore and the mythology, it's really deep. And I think that's what people like about this, and that's why it's so popular. It's actually, it mixes cryptozoology and paranormal interest into one. Both camps get a little something out of it, because it seems to present as an animal primarily. We have something here called Black Shuck, which is like a demon dog, like a dire wolf, or we have a very large, gigantic black dog that is often seen or reported as dematerializing during the encounter. That doesn't normally happen with the werewolf or the dogman. You see the creature moves off, but this Black Shuck, which is always on 4 legs, about the size of a pony, dematerializes often. So apart from, the bipedalism, actually, I don't see a lot of difference between the reports and the paranormal aspect. It's interesting anyway. I'd love to know what it is one day, but just not up close, Seth, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And now, talking about new projects, you're currently in the midst of a very successful Kickstarter campaign for this project. So just tell us a bit about the documentaries, how we can get involved, when and where can we expect to see them?
We're working on, so this is probably our busiest year so far. We're working on, during 2018, I shot the follow-up to Alexander Pedikov's On the Trail of Champ, which is called On the Trail of Bigfoot. Alex, I always have to make sure I give a lot of credit to Alex for On the Trail of Champ, because he shot the entire thing on his own. We had wanted, On the Trail of was conceived kind of on the fly. Like, we knew we wanted to do an episodic series in addition to the Case Files minis, but we didn't know what it was really. So the concept had to sort of come into life while he was shooting, and then continue as I was shooting. So it's been an interesting run with On the Trail of, because it began life as basically let's just do what we already do with Small Town Monsters, only in an episodic form. But it changed, pretty quickly. His crew fell apart on his first day of filming, and no one was with him, so he ended up shooting the whole miniseries himself. And that really impressed me and made me want to try to do the same thing. But whereas Alex was able to just go to Lake Champlain, which is one sort of geographical region, and Bigfoot is a lot bigger than that. So if you're going to tell the history of the subject and do a deep dive into the research that goes on, you're going to have to travel all over the country. So I set out to make, last year, I think I proudly proclaimed on Facebook or something that I was going to do the definitive look at the Bigfoot subject. So I set out to do that on my own, just like Alex had with On the Trail of Champ. And basically it's a 6-episode miniseries. It's close to 3 hours long. And it takes you through the entire history of the subject, as well as, the ongoing search to find Bigfoot. If it's definitive or not, I don't know. That's what I set out to do. But like it was made on a shoestring budget, and I was the only film guy actually shooting it. I do think it acts as a great introduction to the subject for newbies, especially those first 3 episodes, and hopefully it gives everyone sort of a much broader look at the subject and makes them examine it in a completely different way. But that's On the Trail of Bigfoot is the first project we're putting out in 2019. It'll actually be out in about a month and a half on March 29th. And then Terror in the Skies, we shot late last September in Illinois. And that's a look at the winged cryptid phenomena throughout phenomena. Well, I mean, it's kind of both throughout Illinois. Starting with the Piasaw bird and continuing with the Alton, Illinois giant thunderbird flaps of 1948 and the Lawndale incident. We interviewed 2 witnesses, one who saw something that was sort of a flying humanoid, sort of a bird in the road while driving one night, and another who saw a giant feathered thunderbird, I guess you call it, except it had sort of a horn off the back of its head, like a more traditional like pterodon or something, like a pterodactyl. And then kind of dovetailing into the Chicago Mothman stuff that's going on today. So that movie is a lot different. It's going to be our first film, like feature-length film, that'll be out since Bray Road Beast. And that is, they're kind of polar opposites, because Bray Road Beast is a very dark, sort of moody film, and I feel like Terror in the Skies, despite the name, is actually much more whimsical and sort of a lighter look at a subject that I don't really find scary. Much more like mystery adventure than horror in terms of the tone. And we also get to really tell the story of like Lauren Coleman and his interaction with the subject, as well as Troy Taylor. Those are our 2 sort of leads on that project. Like if you look at, we always have one sort of central character, but there's usually like 2 that are kind of like leading the story, and in this case it's Troy Taylor and Lauren Coleman. But Ken Gerhard, we interviewed him. We interviewed Allison Jornlin, Chad Lewis, Kevin Nelson. There's all kind of really, really in-depth interviews. Tobias Whalen. So it should be a really in-depth look at the subject. And then Momo, the Missouri Monster, starts shooting in April. It'll be massive. There's going to be a Cliff Barrickman cameo in it. I do know that. And I'm waiting on one other name that we're working on as well. Elizabeth Saint is going to have a cameo in it. And it's, like I said earlier, it's going to be much more of a narrative than a documentary. The actual documentary side of that story is probably going to be about 30% of the total film. 70% is going to be narrative storytelling. So those are the big 3 projects. The Kickstarter launched not even 5 days ago, more like 4 or 5 days ago, and we were fully funded within 15 hours. So it's at 100, I think close to 130% funded now.
Wow! In 15 hours, you raised the entire thing. Well, this is amazing to me. Now, I did have a follow-up question to that, to do with Kickstarter campaigns for you. It seems rare for independent filmmakers to run such successful Kickstarter campaigns. What advice can you give
in this world? Yeah, in this world, and like the paranormal world for sure. Yeah, cryptids and paranormal. The reason they have such a hard time with it is they do not. The advice I would give is also my critique of the community is that they don't seem to understand you have to legitimately give people something back in exchange for backing. Like you can't just expect people to throw thousands of dollars at you and you're not going to give them t-shirts or like something back. So our rewards are ridiculous. Like if you actually break down level by level on our campaigns, what you're getting in exchange for backing, you're actually getting more in return than you would if you were buying the same stuff off of our web store. So like that's how we've always run it. And that's how we run it this year. Like you back, I think like the $95 level, which that's not even the highest level. It's It's like the 4th or 5th tier up. But you get like 12 things in that level, like a hat, t-shirt, DVDs, posters. So that's always been a big part of it. And then obviously like the promotional end of it. We, like we spend a lot of time promoting the Kickstarter before it launches. So, but I mean, having said that, there's also the track record, like we have a track record of putting out good content. So if we if we didn't try, I don't think we would be making the money, that we are to be able to put back into the films. And I think people see the fact that they put money into the Kickstarter campaigns and you can automatically see it reflected in the final product. Because if you look at the quality growth from Minerva to where we are now, from like, okay, they started out absolutely grassroots camcorders to where we are today, which like Terror in the Skies and the Bray Road Beast are very filmic. They look great. Cinematography's good. The sound's good. And then you got the effects that come in and all that fun stuff. Like something like On the Trail of Bigfoot's a little different because it's told in a new shooter style. It's not supposed to be the same sort of, like over the top recreations and stuff like that. It's very much just a news shooter, journalistic look at the subject of Bigfoot. But our movies, we try to tell in a very exciting, like filmic way, cinematic way. So there's a difference between the two. And I just think the audience is, 2.5 million views on Amazon in 4 years. So the audience that's one platform. We're also on like iTunes, Google Play, and DVD sales and screenings and all that stuff. So once you broaden the audience out, it's millions of people are watching our movies. And that audience, I think, is gaining interest in making sure that we're able to continue doing this. So they want to be a part of it, I guess.
That's visible to me as well, Seth, I think. And I've enjoyed quite a few of the movies myself. I'm a Prime subscriber, so I'm happy to say that lots of them are available, free to stream when you have Prime as well. So that's the way I've seen most of the movies. Now, you've covered so many cryptids, you covered so many monsters so far, but I do have a question for you, which is if you could make a film on any cryptid, any part of the world, what cryptid would you choose? Where would you go? And who would you take with you? So who would be the dream team? Now, exempting people you work with already, I'm talking about an imaginary scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And the directors, people can be past or present. They don't have to be alive.
Oh, man, if we could go past or present, I would do something about the Yeti. And it would be Peter Byrne and Ivan Sanderson and Lauren Coleman would be in there, and I'd probably drag Cliff along with us. It'd be that is the golden era for me, like the time where I want to see someone do a film about that, like very early, like 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, like Abominable Snowman / Bigfoot, field of study. That time and those people were so interesting and like such big personalities. But yeah, it would probably be something about. It'd be that, or I would go to Flatwoods with Gray Barker and Ivan T. Sanderson and see how much of that story they just flat out made up, because I think there was a lot of it. Oh. not to call out Sanderson, but I have huge issues with the retelling of the Flatwoods Monster story.
I've often wondered actually that even for these very serious researchers who've had in the past had these very big careers, like Ted Hoddley and all of these big Loch Ness researchers that were very famous, there are one or two stories, and at some point you have to think, well, even at that point before social media, when people were just buying books, content was expected, and the publisher would call and say, so where's the next book? Do you have these stories? And a couple of things would slip in that were perhaps not as bona fide as all of the other material, and Ted and Ivan and all these different people would just have to make up the text, I guess, or at least.
I don't know about that. What I see with any case involving Gray Barker is that you automatically have to take everything with a grain of salt, if not throw it out wholesale, because Barker was a carnival barker. But he, like when you learn about the Flatwoods Monster, all that information is coming through Ivan T. Sanderson, but most of it was related to him by Barker. So that's why I think you end up with these elements of the story that none of the witnesses really recall ever having said. You know, like to the best of my knowledge, none of the kids saw a UFO on top of the hill in Flatwoods that night. None of them. They said that their mother and Jean saw a glow in the forest off to the side of the hill, but no one actually recounted seeing an actual object. So I've always thought that was really interesting, because the retelling of that story has just changed so drastically, and I always wonder how much of that comes from Barker. You know, Sanderson, I don't know enough about Sanderson. I know Coleman really respects Sanderson, but I think know.
He's respected throughout the entire community, and not taking anything away from him, really. Or, as I mentioned, the other Ted Holiday in regards to Loch Ness, just simply acknowledging that at some point, you know, you've got a deadline, and some of the stories you perhaps would have liked to look into a bit further actually happen to be the only source material you have for that particular episode, like Sanderson with Barker. If that was the primary source material, that's what you just kind of have to run with. Now, finally, to finish, I'd be very, very interested to know what 3 films and documentaries, or documentaries in this genre, you think have had the most profound influence on your style, and why.
I got nothing.
Yeah.
on in this genre.
You know, in search of.
I mean, sure, I could go to. See, the problem is I discovered all that stuff after the fact. Like I just didn't. I've always loved documentaries, but it's all like King of Kong, and you know, like I was a big fan of this documentary called Print the Legend, and stuff like that. But it was not the sort of paranormal stuff. So now, sure, like I really love In Search Of, and I love Mysterious Monsters. There's actually a documentary that has Robert W. Morgan that was called In Search of Bigfoot. That was not an In Search Of. It just happened to have the In Search of Bigfoot title. So I mean, those 3 I always watch, and they're definitely influencing the creation of Momo. But you know, like before, as far as like anything that when I was getting into this or anything that I was aware of prior to like 2 years ago, there wasn't anything. I did grow up watching movies and all genres. I mean, I used to spend weeks. I would have like a month where all I wanted to watch was silent films. So like I'd watch silent films for a month and stuff like that. So I've always digested all forms of film and been sort of in love with the medium. And I think that's why so many of our movies are becoming like almost like a homage to some of the stuff we grew up watching. Like Terror in the Skies has a very 80s Spielberg vibe.
Well, I mean, I'm crazy about Spielberg, especially about early Spielberg. I have to watch Close Encounters, Jaws, the first Jaws. I have to watch E.T. and a few of the films from the genre, even like the stuff with Lucas, like the first Indiana Jones, or even some stuff he produced around that time. I have to watch it at least once or twice a year.
Sure.
But generally, I tend to watch Jaws or Close Encounters at least once every 2 or 3 months, and I think it's because being a musician as well is about this complete interaction between John Williams, between the soundtrack and the way that the movie's made, and the way Spielberg presents that scene. You know, it's so real. I think one of my favorite ever scenes actually comes from Jaws, and it's Roy Scheider with his son at the table when he's mimicking, and when he's been sacked or fired. And I think that's probably one of the best scenes, and the music that goes along with it's just beautiful. I have to put it on. I've got it on my Amazon playlist. Every now and again, it just, you know, it's all these different genres of music coming through, and then boom, John Williams just drops, and you know, it's back to that time again. Now, in regards to what you just said, it sounds to me more like you're saying that actually your style has influenced this genre, not the other way around. So the style of what you love is actually now influencing the cryptozoology and the paranormal genre. So it's a complete switch around.
I don't see that, because I don't see people doing what we're doing. I still see people trying to make movies or shows or whatever about chasing monsters. Like, and you know, like I don't want to call out other filmmakers or anything, but that stuff really bores me. And I obviously I love like In Search of, but if you watch In Search of, it isn't about following someone through the woods, you know, while they go on a night hike or whatever. You know, like that's still the predominant, you know, sort of storytelling is like, let's get some night vision cameras and we're going to go out and look for Bigfoot. So I think we're influencing people in the fact that they might now consider the fact that they might make a bunch of money. Because I think there's an idea that Small Town Monsters is some sort of like multi-million-dollar conglomerate now that was started independently and blah blah blah, rather than like what it basically is was just like an indie rock band. You know, like that's all it is. Like we're managing to do what we're doing independently, but we're not wealthy from doing it. So I see people trying to make money because they perceive that you can. But I mean, for the most part, they're turning away after they make one movie because it's like, oh, we didn't immediately make $1 million. You know, like you got to give props to someone like Bill Lancaster who made his cultured Bigfoot movie and then turned around and made his paranormal Bigfoot. And he's, you know, like he's just sticking with it because, you know, like he enjoys telling stories. So
yeah. No, I like that both those documentaries. I think, well, the first one I've seen actually, Culture Bigfoot. I think it's a very, very good documentary.
Well, Bill just likes storytelling. So like any advice I give to filmmakers, it's always like, go make your movie is like the first piece of advice. Like, shut up about it. Don't start putting out your posters and like begging people to pay attention to you because you want to make a movie. That's great, but like just go actually make it. And the other thing is to love storytelling. Like, focus on the storytelling. Like, stop trying to make a cool movie about yourself running through the woods. Like, focus on how to best tell that story.
I think that's good advice. Really, I mean, essentially, the era of night vision cameras and woods at night might be over, but at least there's something else waiting in the wings. So I think we should leave it here. But I've had a great time. I feel like I've learned a lot about this process and how to be an independent filmmaker from what you've been through. And I just look forward to seeing the new projects come out. And I advise everybody listening to go and check them out, check out the Kickstarter and get involved. It certainly is a wonderful project. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.